Good evening, folks. Bienvenidos, familia. Welcome to the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival Work in Progress Lab. Can you believe it? It's been 4 years. Yes, this is our 4th Work in Progress Lab. Thank you so much for joining us. We joined forces with the fabulous family of PHLAFF to bring this to your home. This is the 3rd year that we're doing it and sharing it with you via broadcast with PHLAFF. So, my name is Marangeli Mejia-Rabell, and I have the honor to serve as the festival director for the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, May 29th through June 5th. Let's talk now about what you're going to see today. So again, you're going to get to check 3 projects. First, we have Leslie Rivera with Esperanza Fights Zombies. The second project is called Abuelita Outside, and it's by Miasarah Lai. The third project comes to us by Stephanie Ramones, and it's called Divided Attention. Now, let's talk about our panelists very briefly. I will tell you that we are so honored to have the opportunity to share space with these 3 wonderful resources that are part of this wonderful landscape of filmmaking and community media and documentary filmmaking. First, we have Robert Chang that comes to us from American Documentary. Secondly, we have Livia Huang, who comes to us from America ReFramed. And last but not least, we have the fabulous, she's not tipping me for this, but I have to say it. They're all fabulous, but Neyda is just a rock star. We have Neyda Martinez, who's an independent producer. You may know some of her films, Lucky and Decade of Fire, but she's also part of the team at the School of Media Studies at the New School in New York City. Thank you so much, and let's get into the projects now.
My name is Leslie Rivera, de Caguas, Puerto Rico. Project is Esperanza Fights Zombies. It is a script I've been working on for the past year. I am in the 3rd draft, and it is a sequel to a feature film I made in 2020 called Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpions, which thematically it's about fatherhood. It's about the fear of, you're entering into this new phase of life and you don't know if you're gonna mess it up or what's gonna happen. And this crazy movie came about called Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpions. So if we could show the clip that says movie made in a rental storage unit, then I can set up and go into Esperanza Fights Zombies.
What's up, everybody? I made a movie in a storage rental unit, and it looks like this. My movie is a campy modern update of 50s and 60s B movies. So you want to see what a movie filmed entirely in a rental storage unit looks like? Then check out Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpions, and also check out all the behind-the-scene videos about the making of it. I think you might like it. Come check it out. I think you might like it.
So that's Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpion, which has kind of started my journey or continued my journey as a filmmaker. I say started because it's my first feature film. I got to a point in my life where I was like, where's my feature film? Where is my feature film? I should have made a feature film by now after all these shorts and all this work I've done. And I finally said, I just finally put my foot down and made it. And I made it by myself, mostly by myself in the storage unit, using miniatures, green screen. And, you know, I put all those elements together and made a feature film finally. So the sequel, Esperanza Fights Zombies, now I wanna have Mami, the wife of Papi Ramirez, to be the one to shine in the movie. And the story for Esperanza Fights Zombies is it's a satire, and America has finally put reparations on the ballot. There's a referendum and people are going to vote for it. And on the day that Mami goes to vote on the referendum, a virus that comes from people's cell phones turns white people into these reparation zombies who want to give their things to anybody they see on the street who's brown skinned. So, you know, they'll come up to people and they'll be like, hey, my Tesla stock is doing so well, I want to give it to you, or I want to give you my house, or, you know, here's my Rolex. But it happens in a way, like when you have like 50 to 60 people like coming up to you wanting to give you all this stuff, it becomes a very dire and deadly situation for the brown folks who are experiencing this. And, you know, it turns out at the end that, you know, the reason that this is being done is because, you know, there's people that are trying to sabotage, you know, brown skin people receiving reparations in this country. So that's essentially like the storyline and the narrative of the movie. And I feel as though it's interesting because I feel as though as an Afro-Latino from Puerto Rico, I kind of look at it in a different way than if I was like born here or if I was like a straight up African American person. Like there's a nuance to it that allows me to explore you know, different avenues, like dealing with colorism and different things, because one of Mami's best friends is also Latina, and she is, you know, for lack of a better word, she looks like a white girl. You know, she's got blonde hair, blue eyes, but she doesn't feel like a white person. She feels she's from the island, you know, she feels like, you know, she's very Boricua. And for her to be put on the other side, you know, like, because there's no, you know, they just stick this phone in front of your face and that's how you become, you know, how this is how these people become zombies. Like, you know, she feels some kind of way about that because it's just based on how she looks. So the movie explores a lot of different things like that. And yeah, it's the next project. I don't know if it's gonna be done in a rental storage unit like my first feature film, but it certainly helps to have that behind me. You know, there's a lot of techniques and things that I can, you know, tools that I can use for my next feature film to, you know, to bring this to make it a reality. So Esperanza Fights Zombies, that's my project, script and development.
What led you to Papi being shot the way it was, or where it was?
Yeah, so my family and I moved to Durham, North Carolina for about a year and a half. And when we first got down there, we were in this little 600 square foot apartment. And, you know, there was nothing that I could do there. I couldn't set up my iMac. It was just too small. So I decided to rent a storage unit. I didn't know what I was going to do in there. I just knew that it would be a space to be creative. And we had a friend who had an artist studio in there. And he told me, you know, there's a lot of bands that rehearse here. There's no studios or any place for bands to rehearse. So they come and they rehearse in these storage units. And so I have my artist studio in here. And I was like, well, I guess I could be like the filmmaker in here. I could be the studio. And so I got a storage unit. And one Friday night around 11 p.m., I just asked my wife, I was like, is it okay if I go to the storage unit? I just feel creative. And I went in there. I already had this like little miniature car, and I love the Twilight Zone, like the black and white Twilight Zone from back in the day. And I was like, you know what? I think I can do like a fun little scene. So I did the scene of like driving in the desert late at night and something mysterious being out there. And it turned out pretty good. And so I continued to there wasn't like a focus on a feature film. I just kept doing scenes, like interesting scenes that were, that had suspense and mystery to them. And as I went along, I realized, oh my God, I have about half an hour of material here. And if I kind of make some tweaks and things, I could make a feature film. And so that's where the idea for Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpions came in, because I wanted some kind of monster. And I had never done stop motion animation or anything like that. So I started off by buying like a remote controlled scorpion from Amazon, and it just kind of took off from there. Like I got the little scorpion and I filmed it, and I turned it into this giant creature that was chasing me. And then by coincidence, my daughter is a Scorpio, and it like the universe, everything just came together. And that's how the movie came about in the storage unit. It was just a place to release my creative energy, and that combined with the nagging feeling of like I still haven't made my feature was the impetus for me to, you know what, I'm gonna do this, and it's gonna get done. I don't care if it's good or if it's bad, but I am going to do it. And I did it, and it completely changed my life.
And people thought that it was good. You ended up winning Nightmares.
I mean, it's won a film festival. It won in 2020. I submitted it to Nightmares Film Festival, and it won the overall award of the festival. And it also got accepted to the Salem Horror Fest. So it's definitely, things that I didn't dream were gonna come from it are definitely materializing from just, giving something to the universe, and the universe like, you know what, I'm gonna hook you up. I'm gonna take care of you. So I feel as though I need to continue with the path of the Ramirezes and continue to tell their stories.
So you have the script, right? And are you going to do animation, or how do you come up with all of this content to lead up to a feature piece? Like, why a feature and not like a solid short?
I've made over 50 shorts in my life, and I just felt like it was time. It just felt like the natural progression to make a feature. It's just a different kind of beast. It's a different kind of commitment to the craft of filmmaking. You just have to, it challenged me, which is definitely something that I wanted as a filmmaker as well. So that was part of the reason why it was a feature.
Okay, I was just asking. Well, I know that in the chat, I dropped in the name of a colleague that I met recently at my university, David Baring Porter, and his scholarship is actually media and the horror genre as it relates to race. And so something that I learned from him is that actually, the zombie emerges from the plantation cultures of colonial Haiti. It's interesting what you're doing is that you're flipping the script. I don't know how steeped you are in the knowledge of the genesis of the zombie, but that it's a result of this mixing of cultures and practices from the transatlantic slave trade. And how these monsters, their actions, are like abusive and around labor and around devouring. But they've always been constructed to still promote fear and otherizing. And so you're kind of flipping the script, right, by taking the reins of this main character. But can you tell me a little bit more about the main character?
So Mami Ramirez is, you know, like Papi, she's Afro-Latina, she's Afro-Latinx, and, you know, even within her culture, she has felt like an outsider, you know, like, you know, there's many times where I've been in PR and I look at the TV and there's a very small percentage of people on the TV in Puerto Rico that look like me, you know, so that is something that I think about a lot, is where do I fit in this whole culture and everything. And then when I came here, nobody ever thinks I'm Latino. Everybody always thinks I'm Black. So there's all this stuff going on where it's like, well, these folks over here are like, oh, you Black. And then these folks over here are like, well, you're Latino. So, you know, for me, you know, Mami is going to deal with those issues, like the issues of identity, where she belongs, where she feels like she fits, and also where her family fits in all this and everything. Because for her, she wants to be able to provide, like, for lack of a better word, a home for her kids, for her family. Like, she wants them to feel like they belong to something. So I think for her, she has to figure it out first for herself before she can pass it on to her children.
So I'm going to make a pitch to you, Leslie. When you were describing the settings in which you were making your first feature, it reminded me of a film that I had encountered a while ago called Garage People. I think it's called Garachenvolk, it's a film set in Russia. And what you were describing just sort of reminded me of what I saw in that film. And I was like, I want to see your film about the folk that gather in the storage units where you made your first film. It was like, so rechannel some of that documentary past that you have in your repertoire and think about that as a possibility. But speaking to your pitch, you know, I'm very interested in hearing about how you're building as a filmmaking practice and as a creative practice, this iterative approach and building almost like the chronicles of the Ramirezes. And so as part of that, I'm wondering if there's going to be other kinds of narrative threads beyond just, you know, that it's her turn to shine, like that connect your prior film with this film, which then may set up the stage for a third, because, you know, a chronicle isn't a chronicle unless there's at least three. So.
Oh, one thing I feel like I should mention is the entire time that I made Papi Ramirez versus Giant Scorpions, I documented it. So I had like 2 cameras rolling at the same time. I had a GoPro and I had another little camera, you know, just filming me in the storage unit. And I've made about 20 to 25 behind the scenes videos from that process. So, you know, I'm just speaking to the documentary aspect of it, because they're very much little mini documentary films, and they're on my YouTube channel, Les El Latino Cine Ninja. But in terms of the chronicles of the Ramirezes, yes, part 3 has to be the kids. Part 3 has to be they have to be the main characters. So it definitely is like a progression. And the way I have it in the script right now, you know, Mami is trying to get back to her family, because one of the things that she sees is that she sees a Black mother and a Black child get separated when, like, some of these zombies are like trying to give things to the child, and the other zombies are trying to give things to the mom. And when she sees this, like, the first thing she thinks about is like, I have to get to my family. You know, I have to protect my family. I can't be apart from them. I can't be separated from them. So, excuse me. So yeah, so definitely the chronicles of the Ramirezes will be the progression, will be the kids, will be part 3.
I thought what I heard of the story was so lively and so engaging. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, like, what are the other consequences of the white zombies suddenly mobbing everybody? Like, because I think you alluded to something about there being like an alternate, like a higher force that's the reason why people are trying to sabotage reparations, presumably not like the zombies themselves, but whoever invented this virus. That's what I think a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so part of what I'm exploring with the script is this idea that, you know, white people might feel like something is going to be taken away from them if reparations happen. And, you know, and that fear, you know, somebody, some kind of higher power who doesn't want this to happen, like they're using that fear to control the narrative. So, you know, it's been a progression, because in the beginning, when I first started the script, you know, the backstory was whoever created this had a relationship with a brown-skinned person who died at the hands of the police. And, you know, it was a good kind of starting off point to where to take the story, but it felt a little bit heavy-handed. And if I can be honest, it's like, I'm very jovial, and I'm very like, my films are, you know, funny and comedic and ironic, and it just wasn't, the direction where it was going was not, you know, it was not, I just felt it in my gut that this wasn't the right direction. So, you know, I hadn't thought about, okay, well, maybe the reason this virus has been created is to sabotage reparations, to twist the mind of people away from it. And so I haven't worked out who the entity is quite yet, but I feel as though it's a strong idea, and it definitely, as I continue to do the rewrites, you know, I think it will be a nice surprise. Like, I'll surprise myself, and I feel as though if I surprise myself, like the audience may be surprised as well. Because, you know, like, I immediately thought like, oh, maybe it's the government, or maybe it's the Republicans, or this and that. But I think it could be a surprise. It could be something that very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say simple, but very, you know, one of those things where you're just like, oh, why didn't I? Of course it would be that person. So that's what I'm exploring in terms of like, who created this virus that is trying to sabotage, like something that should have been rectified many, many years ago. So
I'm reading the introduction. Yeah, so I'm reading the introduction that you offered on paper, and I just want to invite you to revisit, because I think what you just said now is just more synthesized and more compelling. You know, when you talk around this fear, and kind of once you kind of figure out your starting point, what the launch pad is, and because that is the crux, you know, like a social crisis, and fear is endemic or critical to the zombie horror genre. But then I think, you know, it makes an assumption in your text that we know your prior film. So I think it's important to note it, but I don't know that it needs to be a part of the pitch, because we also can assume, right? You know, because this is the first time I'm being introduced to your work. So I'm actually just learning in real time as we are sharing the space together. So yeah, I would just invite you to kind of think about the conversation, because what you just said now was a little bit more crystallized, and I think people would understand it quicker, you know, like, and also like, is it set in the future? Is it set in the present? Like, what time and space are you seeing this film in, or the story unfold? What kind of time and space do you see it unfolding in?
I see it like in the next, you know, it takes place like in the next 2 years.
So kind of in real time. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because I think you can really like bring us like more into the moment. I guess, you know, like this reckoning, the fear, the replacement theory that's in the news. I think some of those contextual elements might just make it a little bit more palpable and tangible, especially fear and crisis. Curious to know who your audience is. Do you know who your audience is? Because you talked about making it as a part of your own artistic need. But as your premiere, your first film rolled out, who is your public? And do you know how to reach them better? Because you're learning, you're building from Papi Ramirez.
To be honest, I haven't thought about that for this particular movie, but I can tell you that one of the reasons I made Papi was I was up at like 1 o'clock in the morning on, just searching on Google, like for either like a sci-fi or horror movie, like a B-style, very specific B-style horror movie, sci-fi movie set in like the 50s or the 60s, starring a brown person, and I could not find anything. And I was like, surely on YouTube somebody has made something, and there was nothing. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to make it. So, I don't know if the right answer is like, mom, the audience, because certainly I want more people than just myself to be the audience. It's been a nice surprise that because Papi thematically is about parenthood and fatherhood, it's very easy to connect to the movie. It doesn't matter what culture or what race you are. If you have experienced that fear or you are in the middle of experiencing that fear, you know what the movie is about. So I don't know. I mean, I do try to have my characters, work out things that all of us are going through, not just the specific issues of who am I, but also we all have all these challenges and all these things that we're battling with every day. And I feel as though those kinds of things connect us, but the honest answer is that I have not thought about it that far, but it is definitely something to think about.
Okay. Well, again, I dropped in the chat the name of another professor at my university whose area of specialization is the horror genre as it relates to race. And then there's also another friend from the Bronx, Eddie Pagan, who started Latin horror. So he might be able to have a conversation with you and trying to understand and unpack who your potential audience may be. Because this is something that he's a longtime arts administrator, but this is his passion project, Latin horror. So, and he's Boricua from the Bronx. He's someone that you might want to get to know. So tell him that I referred you as well.
We're gonna let Miasarah send an opening message to the group. And then after that, we're gonna see a clip.
Hi everyone, my name is Miasarah. I'm a documentary director, producer, and cinematographer. I apologize that I'm not able to join you all in real time, but nonetheless, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share my work with you all. I wanted to start off by giving a big shout out to Marangeli and the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, as well as to the panelists for reviewing our materials, giving us your time and your feedback. I will be looking off to the corner a lot because that's where my computer is, so I'll be looking there for notes. So today I'm going to be talking about my short ethnographic documentary called Abuelita Outside. So it's captured from my perspective. Abuelita Outside chronicles my grandmother's everyday experience with Alzheimer's. Maria, my grandmother, can only communicate through song and fragmented Puerto Rican memories. This short is a sensory, ethnographic, feminist meditation on care, love, and family. It's currently in late production, post-production, and I'm looking for support to finish the film and to find distribution. One of the biggest challenges that I've had with this work is that it's a personal film, a personal independent film. So I am the director, producer, cinematographer, and editor, and I'm even featured in it. So it's really hard to have distance and have perspective. I need support from other people to help me get past this stage that I'm at. I feel kind of stuck. So I have a couple of guiding questions for feedback. First up, the short is 18 minutes, which is kind of an odd length to program. So I've been advised to cut it down to 15 minutes. So I'm looking for suggestions on where to cut. Where might you see places for editing? Additionally, I was thinking about adding voiceover to help shorten the piece and also guide the piece more. Do you think that would be a good addition? Do you think that there might be other devices that I could use that would help instead of the voiceover? What do you see missing in the short? Can you provide suggestions on places that I can fill, or places that you're seeing gaps? On the opposite side of the spectrum, what are the strengths that you're seeing in the film? Additionally, does this film remind you of any other films? I'm looking for inspiration on figuring out how to wrap up this piece. So any film suggestions on what I could watch would be greatly appreciated. And my last two questions here are, based on your experiences, where do you see this kind of film thriving in the documentary landscape? You know, what would be a good home for this short? Lastly, are there any resources in your organization that would help this film or help benefit this film? That's it. That's all I got. I'm happy to touch base with you after this session. So feel free to reach out to me. I wanted to, again, give a big thanks to the Philadelphia Latino Festival for organizing this. I hope to meet you all one day in person, maybe at the festival or maybe at another festival in our industry. Okay, thank you. Take care, everyone.
Dame. Ay, no, espérate, no. ¿Cómo? No hagas eso, porque una no es de otra. ¿Qué pasó? ¿No te has gustado? Porque la tintón, chongo, chongo, longo.
Sí, ¿y qué más?
Tanto.
¿Ah? ¿Y qué más? ¿Vamos a acostarte?
Tanto.
Mira, Santito,
Santito.
vamos a acostarte. Vamos, let's go. Come on.
But I guess based on the clip that she just showed, it made me think, given the style of it, it would be helpful, because I think a lot of people can empathize. Well, a lot of people can't, because a lot of folks don't take care of their elders, but people that do can really understand and relate to what it's like to care for an elder who's going through this kind of dramatic mental change with vis-a-vis the Alzheimer's. But I guess for just a little sense of clarity, it would be helpful, like in some way, to show like morning to night, you know, like what is it like to live one day, like those moments of tension and frustration, you know, sometimes their behavior, they're screaming at you or hitting at you. I mean, here it seemed to be like a very tender moment, and she does emphasize care in her language. And it is a very culturally specific thing to respond to beats and movement and rhythm and song. It's kind of very Puerto Rican and sweet in that way. But I think the tension should naturally arise. You know, I don't think we need to force an arc in it. I think just because you do it out of love, but there's still a frustration that the caretakers experience when the elderly person really can't communicate directly. So really more showing and not telling. I think to heighten the emotive, you know, to really feel that I'm living with this elderly lady. And you do, but in one instance in the film, one of the nieces or sisters is kind of, it looks like she's talking to the camera. I'd have to watch again. So yes, I agree with the 15 minutes. I think there's room to tighten. I would have to watch it again to make just, you know, like suggested notes. But I do think just getting clarity, like in a day in the life of, with my abuelita, like to really get that sense. I do think that a strength of the film is the interaction of the caretaking and the elderly lady. And I think it's such a deep dive into this very modest home life that really takes me to a place where I rarely go. So I think that the piece has a lot of strengths in its intimacy. I would just try to make the cuts and beats a little more emotive, because I do see the joy in the music, but but also just to see like the gestures of the women navigating, grappling, wrestling with the pain of maybe not being recognized, because it hurts us more than it hurts them. So I guess to see that reaction, I think would be really helpful. And I don't know that I got a careful reading of that. You know, like I think it's just important to get more into the faces of the caretakers as it is to the elderly lady, so that we can see not so much the conflict, but that the tension is in the pain and the love overriding the pain.
What do you think about the voiceover piece? How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I think it's such an immersion that if she does focus on the characters and the gestures and the facial, you know, our facial expressions, and where the hands go on caring, I actually would try to do it without it, because then it makes it leading and instructive. And I think the beauty of this piece is that it's so deeply immersive and culturally specific that I would let the body language and the hand gestures and the facial readings be my narration. I would not impose a narration, because it is such a gift to be in this moment, caring for her sacred elderly person. But for me, just a little bit, the chronology for me from the day to night would help, because it is such a succinct piece, especially when we cut it to 15 minutes. Like I remember when my mother was going through that, you know, there were so many moments. I can relate, having cared for my mother at that stage in an ICU. And so that I don't think that we need to impose a narration. I think if we just live the day with her, we will get everything we need, and it could be a real tearjerker.
Yeah, I'm in the world of features, so I'm like racking my brain for other shorts, because all the films that I'm thinking of are features, and you know, the films that connect in my mind that I see in this short are films like Care by Deirdre Fisher, which is an America ReFramed film, Our Time Machine, which was broadcast on POV, and then I was also thinking about, I don't know, maybe Dick Johnson Is Dead, though very different in style and tone, I think. But that was just something that flashed in my mind. And I think for me, one of the reasons that I suggested these three is that they touch on this issue of aging, of care, of memory loss, through very different perspective and voices and stances. And so in sharing these films, it's more of an invitation for her to find her own voice and what she wants to say with the story that she's captured. And, you know, I know that, and I think part of that is finding collaborators with whom she trusts with her project, in the form of an editor, right? Who can be a sounding board to help her both clarify and bring out her voice in the short that she wants to share with the world.
I totally agree with Neyda that voiceover as a crutch, when the thing is conceived without voiceover, never really works. It always feels like tacked on. It feels like remedial in a way. And I feel that the material is stronger than that. And I'm also trying to think of doc shorts, but I thought of two doc features that I felt were in a similar emotive, gestural, not plotty vein. And one was one of my favorite documentaries, Distant Constellation by Siobhan Mizrahi, which is set in a retirement home. I'm forgetting the country now. But you see the residents at different stages of their life, and some of them still have access to like language and like some don't. When you see like cyclical repetitions, and there's no plot per se, but what what compels you is the documentarian's initiative, like her observation, her questioning of like, and her just being with them. And I feel like this is in the same vein. Another one I thought of was what a doc I recently saw, which was What We Leave Behind by Ileana Sosa, and documenting her grandfather in Mexico in his last few months. And I think a strength of that film, which I feel like can be brought out in this short also, is that it is temporal, like Neyda says, like there is also the setting of the day, the closing of the day as a metaphor, but also what structures the feature, and what I think is also still present because the filmmaker is in the film, is her asking the questions and her arriving someplace after a while with the kinds of questions she asks. So I think these are all like different, subtle, more like in-depth themes that are already in the material that could provide the structure that she's looking for.
If she chooses, to arrive at 15 minutes, right, to show it to POV, right, depending on her choices, you know, for an editorial review, right, for your shorts producer there. I think those are best bets. Because I think HBO Latino is straying away from shorts, but you never know. But I think right now the focus is on, depending on her choice, but I mean, I think that we have a consensus, it seems, that gesture and emotion and let the day inform the arc. It seems like my POV family, like, you know, we're all on the same page with that. If she wants to take that in, I don't know. And then also AARP. You know, I have a contact in New York with AARP, not that they have resources, but they certainly have a constituency. And Casita Maria, like I think all of these, there are so many senior citizen homes in our Latino communities and beyond that I think she has already a natural engagement network. You know, I know in Chicago, in my neighborhood back home, it's Casa Central. In New York, it's Casita Maria and Borinquen houses. I mean, there are just a million of them. But Maggie Castro at AARP in New York could be a real supporter of this film once it's finished, but for an online screening and a discussion. And then also the aging, you know, Department of the Aging in many municipalities could be a real great partner for her and possibly a source of money. But I would work and I would try to identify some of the leading Latino, you know, psychiatrists or medical doctors working in this space to tap into that network of professionals, not only for possible support, but to enhance some of the learning materials that may accompany this piece, things like that.
One other suggestion I would also look into as this project is in production or close, you know, closing in on posts or completion, is to take a look at World Channel, specifically their local USA programming thread. And then they have an open call for entries as well.
Thank you.
And since she's multi-talented and many times like your first piece or early pieces are kind of like a showcase of your capacity, I mean, you can still, you know, like editors are very busy and as soon as they kind of grow up, they're really hard to get. But even if you had a consulting producer, just someone to speak with is, I think, really helpful in your budget so that you can still benefit from the notes and the dialogue and the questions and critical thinking, but you still are the one implementing it, because it would be a very compelling calling card for her in the industry to finish this piece on her own too. But she can still benefit from counsel by paying like, you know, a day rate or a weekend rate to an editor that would grant her the time and could help her finesse a paper cut, you know.
The floor is yours, Stephanie.
Awesome. So I directed Divided Attention in partnership with Philly Cam, who's also a partner of this panel today. Pretty much a little bit of backstory is two organizations approach us from Delaware County. So Divided Attention is actually set in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is a little bit south of Philly if you're familiar with the area. And they wanted to pretty much approach how they were using mindfulness practices in underserved middle schools and high schools, and I believe also elementary schools, to battle the school to prison pipeline, especially for students that identify with having some disability. So that's how the first thing started. As time went on, a lot more layers opened up to the story. So the first layer that came up was the whole school district was under threat of being turned into a charters organization. So essentially, even as far as the school district was under threat of being taken over by a charter managerial kind of company, and would have made it kind of the first in the country. So there's that. Then the last layer that kind of happened on top of all of that is that we had COVID. So a repeated theme that kind of happened during production was we had a plan and we threw it out the window because some other update to do with either COVID or the school or some other restriction would come in or something would open up. So the part of the good chunk of the film is self-filmed by the students we asked to participate. We had 4 students that allowed us to kind of follow them along as they engage with this mindfulness program. And they shared a little bit with us of like how they felt with the program, what helped them with it. But really what we got to delve into is just the backdrop of everything else that was going on with the charterization and other historical factors that contributed to what the current situation in Chester Upland was. So with that, I'd like to start with just showing the trailer.
So picture yourself looking out at the ocean, just watching the waves of the ocean. Can you picture it at all?
Yeah.
Waves in the ocean are like life.
Wait. Did you say waves are like life?
Yeah.
Meditation helped me with my anxiety. I have a lot of that, actually.
And when something goes wrong, my heart just stops pumping and pumping and pumping.
I start heavily breathing from a panic attack.
It's like an ocean wave. When something hits, it makes a big like tsunami in your brain. Once you do mindfulness, it like cools it.
What mindfulness is doing is showing students that you have options, that you're just not stuck in this play mode. You can reset, you can rewind, you can fast forward.
I have seen mindfulness programs be real game changers for children. But also, you have to remember, in school districts like Chester Upland, that are low wealth school districts where the state has not adequately funded the schools, you can have decades of children who have not received a quality education.
Chester Upland School District, no question about it, from the history of it all, got an unfair shake.
This city's been potentially changing for the last 25 years. Every year there's a change. There's an empowerment board, there's a controlment board, there's a receiver, there's this, there's that. I mean, there's nothing new to change in this district.
We're still allowing for the perception that if you're poor in this country, if you're black and brown in this country, if you're white and poor in this country, you are less than. And therefore, we can't do what we want to you when we want to do it.
And so that's where Chester is right now, treading water.
The current state of this school district is now in the path of literally being sold out.
If I don't want my child to go to a charter, where do they go?
Okay, that's a good question.
Does anyone even ask how our students feel about this process right now?
People are worrying more about the money than they're worrying about the children.
Are you here because to help poor little old Chester, or are you here because you know that we are a gold mine?
I think the biggest thing for us is trying to meld 2 big stories and still give justice to like the program, but also make sure we tell this important backstory, because we try to make sure people could tell that it's not just a bad situation that everybody got themselves into. It was really important to me to not make this another kind of, for lack of a less crass way of saying it, trauma porn, where we're just dumping everything that's going wrong without giving even some necessary context of people are continuing to fight even though they're given all these kind of circumstances. The one more clip I'd like to show is just kind of give a little bit more background into how it was like producing it and also how it's like to institute the program. So if we could show clip 1 off the playlist.
The pandemic, has uprooted all of us,
And I'm not allowed, or I wasn't allowed to be in the building for a long time. None of us were in the building.
We had to pivot, course correct, like everyone else, and move to virtual.
Basically what happened is, they talk about the achievement gap, but there was a technology gap.
Since we didn't have a whole lot of technology to begin with, training teachers to use it was not really a priority all the time.
Here we go.
I can't hear you. Something wrong.
Still there, Raphael?
Internet connectivity has been an issue.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Attendance has been a challenge.
So we'll give it a few minutes to see kids start coming in. Evan. 7-3. So 7-3, according to this.
No, I do not have her right now. All right, so I'll hang up, okay? Val, are you able to go to a place in your house where it's a little bit more quiet?
That is so frustrating.
Some of the classrooms now became closets, bathrooms, back porches, living rooms, wherever it may have been. And I think there were a lot of obstacles with that. I mean, not every student wants to have their computer open and so that other people in the classroom are looking in their living room or looking at the space where they're learning from.
It's just that you have to turn on your cameras constantly. If you don't, you get kicked out of class or you get rolled up or in trouble for it. When sometimes you can't turn on your cameras because of certain situations, or you can't turn on your volume because of certain situations, and they're just gonna keep going at it.
We made it!
Yeah.
Well, let's picture yourself on the boardwalk then. Can you picture yourself on the Atlantic City boardwalk for a moment?
Yeah.
So picture yourself looking out at the ocean. Just watching the waves of the ocean. Can you picture it at all?
Yeah.
Waves in the ocean are like life.
Wait. Did you say waves are like life?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. Yeah. I like sometimes things go like smoother. Sometimes things go like crazier sometimes.
Yeah. Totally. There's smooth parts of life, right? Like this conversation's pretty smooth.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have other things happen or other things that we're doing in life where it's a little rougher, or like you said, a little crazier. Maybe some bigger waves, more intense waves.
Well, Nathan is a very nice child. He's very quiet, but he can be talkative. He's very helpful. He loves to help. He loves to do his work. Like when he do good, he gets so excited. But I feel like COVID really made him struggle with school, because being on that computer, it was just rough.
So a lot that was said in there was also relevant to how it was like making the film. I think the biggest things where we're at now is we're very happy. We're finished. So we just wrapped up most of post-production, barring potentially a TV edit for being able to show it somewhere locally. We are premiering at PHLAFF, which is really exciting, and also having a community screening. The biggest challenge we're kind of running into is getting it distributed to people that can do something about what's going on in Chester. So kind of getting it out to lawmakers, to other activists in the area, along with also other educators, to both talk about instituting things like mindfulness approaches versus punitive approaches in schools, and also talking about this kind of constant threat of charterization for a lot of Black and brown school districts, because Chester might have been the first ones to try it, but they're not going to be the last. There's more and more kind of school districts that are about to get taken over by charter organizations, especially in places like New Orleans and Puerto Rico as well, that are currently kind of under threat of just being bought out. So with that,
I know that's not the crux of your film, but since I'm not a parent of a little person, Do you explain that for some folks? Because we hear in the news, you know, like the privatization, like public dollars for private entities.
Yeah, we that was also one of like the big challenges as well we had with like trying to explain about like 4 different terms that we had that were very into it. So another thing was also trying to explain that the school district is actually currently under receivership, which it means that the state determined, in lack of better words, that the city could not manage the money by themselves. So they had a judge appoint someone that's sole job is determine how the budget is, and that's who we see in the trailer talking about every year there's something. He was a receiver at the time of everything going on, so we had to explain that as well. We try to take a lot of time to explain stuff, and that's also partly how animation got thrown into it, was to be able to explain that.
Thank you.
I guess I was curious about if in your film you talk about what the term mindfulness means, because it seems like pretty diluted in like wellness industry and stuff. And so I'm curious about if you do like, because I did like the framing of mindfulness versus punitive, and I was just wondering if the elaboration is in the film.
We do. So we do a little bit with Stacy, who's the instructor we meet, talking about it, but one approach we also took was asking the students to explain it. So we do have some explanations from both, like the adult in the room and then the students as well. So yeah, we do go into it, and you're 100% right. It is very much diluted. It's become kind of a buzzword. So we do go specifically into showing kind of the practices. I do have one clip that kind of shows a little bit more of like what the practices look like when they were in the room, but just in the interest of time, I'll just pass it along so people can see it. But yeah, so we do try to go into that as well. So we try to cover a lot in this film.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that in terms of the many threads of what was unfolding over the course of the time of your production that you managed to capture on film. And as you move towards an edit, you know, you're done with production, and you said it's premiering, so congratulations. And so this is really a 2-part question. One, you mentioned, and this is, I'm speaking from the stance of somebody who's positioned in public media, and public media has a very specific understanding of what counts as independent media, right? And what counts as editorial freedom of the independent filmmakers. And so if you are commissioned or if you're brought in by an entity to make a film about a program, and they have any editorial say in what you can or cannot show over your film, it quickly becomes potentially a challenge for public media stations to showcase your film, because then it starts to look at paid promo. Even the perception of conflict of interest can be an issue, right? So that's one flag that I wanted to raise when you were talking about your project and how you were initially brought in, because I think what you covered was substantially beyond what was initially imagined, and just being clear with both yourself and with anyone who is interested in showcasing your work, like what were the editorial decisions, who had editorial control. That's over Final Cut is really key. And the second question that I had, an observation that I had, was sort of in the trailer, the editing, highlighted these things that were happening. It juxtaposed them, and I was wondering, are there characters that thread across both the charterization conflict as well as the mindfulness education that you're trying to showcase, that also happen to be on screen and visible in the kinds of online interactions that you showcase? Because if there was that character, it seems like there could be an arc that threaded these things together in a way that produces sort of a TV edit of how these things come together around a specific character.
Gotcha. In regards to the first question with the independence media, that's a very good point. We did have a lot of editorial control. That was part of the benefit of working with PhillyCam, and PhillyCam being like the main producing organization. They are a public media organization. We did have an executive producer that was a part, pretty much like a liaison between the organization that contracted PHLAFF and us. And we were funded by a grant by the PADDC Council, which is a government federal grant for kind of displaying like disability in school systems. I feel like now in our materials, we probably should address that more. So that's a good thing to flag for us. In regards to the second question, that was probably one of our biggest challenges in the edit. It was trying to find something that like kind of crossed that bridge. In terms of students, we did not have any students that kind of like really talked about it much, because it was, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of, I don't want to say outreach, but like necessarily like it didn't bleed down to the students as much, especially at the middle school level. I believe the high schoolers knew more about what was going on, but middle schoolers did not. We did talk to a lot of parents in the area that kind of like helped thread that together, and there is a thread between punitive practices and the likelihood of being charterized and things like that, and how that's kind of connected. So there's like the main thread is ultimately the lack of funding and how it just opens it up to all these things like the punitive practices and being bought out by a charter organization. That's like the main two threads, but directly with one character, other than some of the teachers, not necessarily.
So I'm about to drop a link in the chat, and it's called the PBS Red Book, and it's part of the standards and guidelines for public media. And specifically take a look at the funding standards and the editorial guidelines around that.
Awesome.
But one of the things that I did want to stress is that as I was watching your film, I loved the animation. Right? I felt myself taking a breath, the ways that you're able to highlight sort of the perception, the eyes opening up, like that was a delight to see, and a delight for you to incorporate, within the film. And I think that is, that's a gem. And I think there are ways that you can leverage that in whatever length or format you want to deploy different elements of these stories depending on your audience.
Gotcha. Yeah, animation's probably one of my favorite parts that came out, and also happened to be one of the easiest parts of post-production was working with our animators. Made everything so much easier after a lot of things were not easy. One of the biggest goals for the film is to kind of get this message out of that it does not, everything how it is now doesn't have to be what it has to be, if that makes sense. So I think education is something we talked a lot about, was they think it has to be punitive practices to create these outcomes with these areas that are just flat out just underfunded. Versus putting programs like a mindfulness program that is far more effective, not exactly high cost, like it's a fairly low cost kind of program, but it just kind of puts things on its head in what traditional schooling is. So that's like the first big goal. And the second big goal is to pay attention to what's happening in the education system as a whole, because I think this is very much the canary in the coal mine of seeing this happen in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is the home of a lot of firsts. It's the home of the first public school in the country. It's the home of where Penn landed. There's so much history there, and to see it kind of go through this again and again and again, it happened when they desegregated. I want to make sure that I hope that more people in the U.S. start seeing what's happening, essentially. That's the big goals for the film.
It would help you to kind of just think about some of the ideas you share here and some of the crystallization, because it seems so important, like, that this history takes place in Chester, you said, and then really to articulate, the various crises and tension points, that you're overcoming, because there is a deep conflict there. And this, again, you say it so clearly and succinctly, mindfulness versus punitive, that does not appear in the text you offered, because that just makes it so much more clear. And in your text, you can also describe that you use animation to convey some of the emotions. So I think one of the outcomes for sure is to revisit your introductory synopsis. And I'm happy to look at it again when you're done. I mean, it's something Robert and I do all the time. Because you have a real opportunity to make it much more compelling. It does look like you have an important piece, and it is really clear to just underscore and echo Robert's comments that this is not a work made for hire. You know, that this was an award and not a direct, you know, not like a PSA for an entity. So that you were, you know, that should appear in your materials, you know, in the fuller press piece. This is the outcome. The resources came from an award, that it is not a dictated work made for hire.
I would underscore what Neyda said, that reading the materials presented, it did seem like COVID was more of a focus of the film than it turned out in at least your verbal pitch. So I feel like the way you explained it about the lack of funding being the cause of all of this, and which echoed also what the former receiver said about his feeling of the futility of various programs put in place. I think the stronger you make that bridge, the more it'll pop. Because I think reading it, I was more confused as to what it is about than when you explained it to us.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, because your work sample, it is, I think it did grab us. I think it's safe to say that we were in it with you in the moment. And so that use that so that it mirrors, your language kind of mirrors what unfolds, and then use that as an opportunity to educate us on the larger text and subtext of the film and what those conflicts are, which is the persistent disinvestment of public education in our communities.
Got it. Thank you so much, because we're also like working on like making discussion guides when we take this to like educational conferences is another avenue we were talking about doing. This is really helpful.
Well, something we did in Decade of Fire that you might want to try or explore is that the curriculum, like we have a free curriculum, you can check us out on Decade of Fire, but we did that with teachers from the South Bronx. Because it's so hard to get into the DOE, you know?
Yeah.
So we have to workarounds, right? And so our workaround was after school programs, tutoring programs, all kind of other, you know, social service support for education. But if you have the teachers really a part of writing it, then it seeps into the fabric of the education system. Because getting something federally or supported by the DOE or state or city, it is a very, very difficult. Even the most resourced projects on PBS sometimes don't get, like even public Latino Americans on PBS, even that, we had to do a workaround. Even that didn't get into the curriculum because, as you know, our histories are being banished from the curriculum.
Yeah. And it's funny because now they're also going, this is under the umbrella of social emotional learning, and they're also starting to go after these programs specifically because somehow it's related. Yeah.
So hospitals could be a good place, anywhere like where parents convene, you know, like where do parents naturally go? And because mindfulness has this nexus with mental health and health, I don't know why I'm thinking some hospitals really have great public education and seminar programs. Like even my local Methodist hospital here in Park Slope has a lot of community programs. And certainly you have to pound the pavement like an organizer. You have to go to all of the community board meetings and really, and I would really start with the PTA. Like you really have to model grassroots organizing, and parents I think are central to your campaign.
Thank you so very much for joining us. Wasn't that fabulous? I know an hour is not enough, and there's a lot more than we can talk about these projects and about other things. So please join the conversation, join us on social, please join Philly Cam, become a member, check the programming. They do amazing work. Before we go, I want to thank our tech master, Kirsten Senske. I want to thank the team at Philly Cam for this fabulous collaboration. And I want to send a big shout out to the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival's family, our team, our creative team, all of the festival team, and all of the filmmakers and creatives, collaborators, volunteers, and everybody else who gets hello familia when we see each other. And last but not least, our audience. Thank you for making PHLAFF such a fabulous experience, because PHLAFF is you. Thank you. Have a good night.